Chris, thank you so much for joining me today. On LinkedIn, you say, and I quote, I believe business can be used to restore stability and dignity for migrants and refugees. Our current business helps great companies hire dependable employees from the refugee workforce. This is so powerful. When did you first realize that you wanted to work with the refugee community, and what led to the idea of Amplio Recruiting, specifically connecting refugees to jobs?
Yeah, well, we moved into a refugee community right outside of Atlanta, Georgia, called Clarkston. It's called the most diverse square mile in the U.S. by CNN. And so my wife and I moved into that community. We, at the time, did not recognize really what was most unique about that community, which is all the refugee resettlement that's occurred there over the last 40, 50 years. We just were trying to find a house we could afford. And as often is the case, maybe you look back on your life, or even in this current season in your life, you're like, what am I doing here? What is the purpose for me in this, in this specific situation? And then maybe it is that you'll look back and say, oh, I recognize the reason why, and for us, that was kind of the part of town we were trying to find a home. And so we moved into a house and began to get to know our neighbors and run errands in the community and just run into people who obviously did not grow up in the U.S. And so I was the annoying white guy who would ask the questions that you're probably not supposed to ask to my new neighbors, and just say, hey, do you miss it back home? What kind of food did you used to eat? Can you find it here? Just these fairly annoying questions, but it always led into a really productive conversation about culture and life. And they were very patient with me to answer my questions, and the conversations would always end with them saying, can you help me find a job? And for us at that time, we had started a few other businesses, and we were always up for thinking about a new business and maybe ways we could employ these individuals. And so after about a year of a lot of discussion and questions, we ended up with this idea of launching a staffing company. And we had no background in staffing, but we just felt like, how hard can this be, right? These are people who need jobs. They seem like they'd be incredible employees. And there's a lot of companies in our network that are looking to hire. And this was 7 years ago. So 2014, it was bad then, nowhere near what it is today. So we said, let's launch this thing. And we just recognize there's an ample amount of individuals who are looking for work, and there's an ample amount of jobs that are available. And so Amplio Recruiting was born, and we had no idea what we were in for at that point.
I love so much of what you said, and I want to just re-emphasize and pull out a couple things. First, incredible that the community you moved into had been a resettlement community for 40 to 50 years for refugees. That kind of blew my mind when you said that. Second, I love how you phrased, I guess, the question of taking a moment to think about, why are you at this place in time and this point in time, and is there a reason for it? And being open to maybe there being some intention or opportunity behind where you happen to find yourself. And then for you and your wife to actually take a look around your community and realize that there's something you can do within the place you did find yourself living. So I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in South Georgia where most people were like me, thought like me, spoke like me, and to be in a community that wasn't like that, just fascinating. And I think we just were responding in the way that maybe anybody else would, by kind of taking stock of what's going on around us. We loved being able to go into people's homes and eat dinner with them, and that always just led to fascinating conversation. And looking back, I'm not sure how we could have done anything different. We just felt like there's got to be a way to support these individuals, and at the same time support the companies that desperately need help. So that's where we landed. And yeah, for 50 years plus, this community has been resettling refugees. At the beginning, it was individuals from Vietnam, and then just wave after wave as things have happened around the world. So individuals from all over Africa and all over the Middle East, and they've created a really peaceful but really unique community. And honestly, there's communities like that across the U.S. That we're just they're hidden in plain sight within a lot of major metro cities like Atlanta. You'll have a small little community where people from all over the world have called home and learned to figure out how to work together and live alongside each other.
I love that. And another thing you said, I want to pause and call out. You classified yourself as the annoying white guy asking all of these questions. And I just want to say that I wish more people were like you and leaned in with curiosity when they met others with a different background. And I don't think there's anything annoying about that. I think that's leaning in with an open heart and really looking for a connection and common ground. So I applaud you for setting an example of creating connection across what could be considered divides.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, my my neighbors might disagree with you about it being annoying or not, but yeah, I think that's what we've come away with from our journey. We're often asked, what would you encourage other people to do? And I do think it comes down to making a friend and connecting with someone who didn't grow up in the same culture that you did, because whatever the storylines are, the headlines that we see in the news and the media, when they become personal, because someone, their name and their situation, and it's not just a statistic in the news, it gives you so much more perspective and so much more empathy to really consider things from someone else's perspective. And if we're able to do that, it just changes the way that you think and the way that you interact with people, the way that you spend your time. And it's definitely been the case for us.
I love that. Now, you mentioned that you had no experience with building a recruiting or staffing agency. So, how did you get started? How did you get Amplio off the ground?
Yeah, we made a lot of mistakes. The first, in launching the business, I think it was about a year of just exploring and attempting different business models to figure out what was going to work and what the marketplace would respond to. We knew we had individuals who were really motivated and dependable people that would be great employees, but just trying to figure out how to get companies to recognize that and be willing to compensate it for us. And so at the end of the day, the staffing industry has been around forever, and the business model they operate under is really sound. It's just that the reputation for the staffing industry is very deplorable because of the way that they treat people, which is the main commodity that they should be very motivated to serve. And so we just said, let's use the same business model. Let's just try to flip the impact on its head and really put people over profit and see what happens. So that's really kind of how we settled in, and still really have the basic same model today, 7 years later. Just trying to be very cognizant of how we serve people, how we engage the refugee community, and making sure we're finding the right clients. Even to the point that we put a 30-point scale in place to make sure that we're serving clients that are the right fit for us as a business and for the community that we're trying to support.
What sort of things are involved in your 30-point scale? What do you look at?
Yeah, some of it is just really practical in terms of being a good client for us to work with as a business. In terms of our margins and willing to pay our rates and that everything kind of fits from that perspective. But there's a lot of things that are really impact driven. Just kind of thinking about the overall culture and environment of the company. If we go for a visit and nobody seems to be calling each other by their first name, then that's probably a good indication that this is not an atmosphere where people really feel comfortable to bring their whole selves to work and bring their own kind of background, cultural, ethnic, whatever it might be, perspective to the table. Just simple things, right? We work with we work with a lot of manufacturing companies. We work with hospitality and food service companies, and sometimes this work is really difficult and really hard. And so, something as simple as like, is there a break room, and is it a comfortable environment to sit down? Is it a place you actually want to have conversation with people that you work with? If we see a break room that doesn't really even have a table and it's dimly lit, then it's probably not. This is not overall a place that values community and values teamwork and the innovation that can come when people of different backgrounds get together and try to solve problems. So, we're just looking for those things that can help us identify a company is really committed and serious about not just warm bodies, but really engaging every person that's on their team, because that's really how you create an environment that is not only going to be successful for business, but also a place where people can thrive and flourish and be completely who they were made to be.
I really like how you described that. And what resonated the most for me was the emphasis on the type of community that the culture of the company creates and allows to foster there. And I think that's important for anyone looking for a job that they want, is how are they going to feel in that company. But especially when you think about people who've been relocated and are new to America, I think having a place that feels welcoming is even more important for integration into a new location that can be really difficult already on its own.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to think about the jobs that no one else wants, and that those are the jobs that individuals who are resettling should be stepping into, right? And that's just kind of the way it works. But I think that there's a standard we all should be held to some capacity, that we're creating environments, not just because that's the right thing to do, but it really does have an impact on your bottom line. I mean, you can't, there's so many studies to show that now. It's really hard to ignore it. And I think even right now, there's a moment in time for companies to respond as, whatever we call this season. It's not post COVID, but we're living in a moment in time in which people are expected to show up and work. There's a lot of open jobs, and companies have the chance right now to say, you know what, we're gonna pay more, or at least we're gonna be on par with what the industry standard is in our region. And we're gonna do some other things to create an environment here that is a place where not only people want to start work, but people want to stay in this job. And so, we get to see a lot of companies responding in positive ways right now. And it's really, yeah, it's really encouraging to see that across the board in different industries in different parts of the country. Companies, recognizing they have an opportunity here to build their team and to really invest in their team, instead of just kind of trying to, to kind of be scrappy and just sort of take whatever they can get and take advantage of people along the way. So I think it's an important time, and we're seeing even industries that have long been held as your kind of immigrant and refugee industries, like meat processing, chicken plants, that kind of thing. You just see a lot of companies that are saying, yes, this is a hard place to work, but how can we make some improvements in the way in which people engage the work that they spend so much of their life a part of?
Mm. I love so much of what you said. I mean, the power of when you have a healthy culture at your work, what that, and there's so many studies that show this, what that does to employee engagement, what that does to because of engagement, efficiency and effectiveness of your workforce. There's so many spillover benefits. And I love the lens you used and the invitation you used for businesses that right now are struggling with trying to fill up their workforce. They have shortages, and really looking at this time and this opportunity as a reset of how to build a culture that people want to stay at, how to put people first, and your business is going to benefit as a result of that. I really love the way you phrased that. So,
Yeah, we try to help companies think about that overall kind of package that they offer. We, often in our language, it's your benefits package, and we immediately think about 401k and how many days off you get. And we just recognize the community that we work with, the number one desire is stability. It's been ripped away from them. And so to have that again is sort of a platform where then they can start to think about things beyond that. And so how do they grasp stability, and what does that look like? Well, 401k is probably not part of that discussion, but something as simple as a business card with their name on it, or a name tag, or a company uniform, those things communicate a lot about stability and the commitment the company has to that individual. And it doesn't necessarily cost that much. And so we just try to help companies navigate this idea that if you're trying to build stability and you want individuals to join your team and be there for a long time, it doesn't necessarily equate to a big investment financially. It's just about being creative in the ways that we're engaging them and bringing them to be a part of the team.
I love that. And it's so true, the power of symbols to communicate things like a uniform or a name tag showing that you've been accepted into this new organization and this new culture. Now, can you share a little bit about why it's hard for newly arrived refugees to find work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we get that all the time. And you know, I feel like we should have a better answer for it. I think what we really see is it comes down to individuals having some sense of a social network. And I'm not talking about social media, but having a web of connections that allow us to really move forward and be successful in society. I think we all, to a certain extent, take for granted the ability that we've had to kind of depend on and lean on, just connections that we've had all of our life, regardless of whether we're upper class or middle class or whatever. The fact that we grew up in this country and we lean on our common language and just the etiquette and sort of the norms of how life works, and that allows us to tap into these social groups that we're a part of. I mean, that it's just kind of how life happens anywhere in the world. So when that changes, and all of a sudden you're expected to be able to do something similar in a brand new environment with a different language, that maybe you've commanded some sense of the language, but there's still some intimidation around using the language effectively, and being able to find opportunities to move forward, whether it be a job or just finding the right school to attend, and furthering your education, other opportunities for engaging in hobbies or whatever it may be, volunteering in the community. I mean, those are all things that most of us are able to access through other channels, through our social network. And so for them, it's starting over. It's overcoming any fear they have and trying to understand how things work, and the appropriate pathway to track down anything that you're interested in or trying to engage in. So if we get to be involved in the employment piece, it just allows them to know that they can trust us. We're going to find good jobs, and it may not be a career-long kind of job, but it's something that can help them move towards stability. And we can kind of help navigate for them that process of getting in the company, getting in the door, past the gatekeeper, getting that job and getting started on the right foot.
That's such a huge help. And I'm reminded as you're talking of two things I find myself often repeating. And it's that relationships make the world go round, and so do stories. And when you're talking about people being resettled into a new country where they may or may not speak the language, and all of their social networks are no longer there, that's a huge disadvantage. Even from just asking people advice, getting advice from the trusted people in your network about how the systems work within this new country that you're in, not having that readily available, let alone connections to organizations that might be hiring. So I think that your company is doing a really great job of helping fill that gap and helping to facilitate a network for people who have lost their network. And the second one is that storytelling makes the world go round. And that brings me back to earlier in our conversation when you were talking about the difference of reading the headlines of a story or of a country and people coming from there. And that's very different than meeting individuals and learning their stories. And it shifts perspective entirely. And I think the more that we're able to elevate human stories beyond headlines to breed understanding, just the better we'll function as a society, period. Because we'll actually see people for people instead of for the headlines we've been communicated. So I really appreciate you bringing both of those to life in a very tangible way.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, stories are so powerful, and we actually read a book a couple years ago called Refugee Workforce. We released it in the fall of 2019. And so, as much as the world is different now from that point when we wrote the book, we really were just describing stories of companies who have hired individuals from the refugee workforce, and also the individuals who have taken those jobs and how it affects them. And that was the whole goal, is just to put some stories out there and help some companies grasp what seems to be a really complex, kind of big undertaking is actually not. It's just a matter of taking a few steps and thinking about things strategically. And so we told a lot of stories in there, but I would love to tell one if I can right now.
Yes, please.
Some of the questions that you're asking just kind of made me think of Amnobi's story. So she is a refugee from Congo, and actually in the US right now, still the #1 country that have exported refugees to the US is the Democratic Republic of Congo out of Africa. And a lot of people don't recognize that. We think about Syria, or we think about even now, the number of Afghan refugees will be picking up immensely over the next 12 months. But over the past, I don't know, maybe 10, 12 years, Congo has been one of the countries that has sent the most refugees into the U.S. And so Amnobi's story, really quickly, we share a little bit of her story in the book, but actually we didn't even get to capture one of the most amazing aspects of her story that happened after the book was printed. So this idea that a company can be a place and have a culture where individuals can come in and find employment and not just find stability, but maybe even go beyond that. What does that look like? So Amnobi, back home in Congo, her village was under attack from kind of rebels that were taking over the country. And so they fled. They ended up in a refugee camp, and she met the man who would become her husband there, and they started a family there. They had a son, and they decided after war had kind of died down, they would go back home to their village. So they went back, and they're living life there again. And after a few years, as she says in her own words, war came back to her village. And so in the middle of the night, they had to flee for a second time. And this time, in the process of fleeing, she gets separated from her son. He's 7 years old, and I have a 7-year-old. So I just, I can't imagine what that's like, but I do know that as a mom in that situation, she did everything she could possibly do to find her son. And in the chaos of everyone running and fleeing and trying to get to a safe place, somehow they were separated. She ends up in the refugee camp and, hoped that she would be able to reunite with him there, but never was able to find or reconnect with her son. And fast forward a few years, she ends up in the US with the rest of her family, and she needs a job. She comes to our office, and we're able to help her step into a job at a company that manufactures and bottles shampoo. And this is a place that has hired a lot of Congolese refugees. And so she immediately felt at home. She was able to not only communicate in French, but also begin to learn English. And she was really committed to that. She was able to get to learn fluency enough in English to get her GED, and then be able to move up at the company. And then eventually even able to get a mortgage and buy a home and have this huge home for her immediate family and others that made the journey with her to the US. And so we were just writing her story as someone who had been able to move up in a company and now is in a position of management. And she had started creating music videos. She loved to sing and she did that back home. And so she started making these music videos and putting them on YouTube. And at the point at which were writing her story, one of her videos had hit like 40,000 views. And so it's just a cool story of like, hey, employment is good. It leads to stability, but it also can lead to things well beyond that, right? That she had the time and mental capacity to start doing something that she loved to do. So we print the book. And the day that we were having our launch party, she'd come by our office and I said, Nobi, you'll be there tonight, right? You know, we want to celebrate you along with several other stories that we're telling in the book. And she said, yes. And she's leaving. And she says, oh, by the way, I found my son. And I was like, what? What do you mean? What do you can't just like say that and leave, excuse me, and leave the office. And she's like, oh, you know, the music video that I released and went viral, and all these Congolese, you know, individuals around the world, the diaspora, were watching this. And so someone was watching this video and my son looks over, who's alive and well, still back in Congo. He sees it and he says, that's my mom. And the person watching the video says, well, I'll message her right now. And so through Facebook and YouTube, she gets to reconnect with her son, who's now 14 years old. And just because she was in this place, you know, we can't claim any responsibility for that story, but she was in this place of stability. And then beyond that, where she could start to engage in her community and produce these music videos. And it leads to her reconnecting with her son. It's just awesome, you know. And I think like employment plays an important role. And the more companies that we can get to recognize that, you know, the more stories there are like that, of just awesome reunions and people getting to a place where they can be their full selves.
Oh my gosh, literal goosebumps as you're telling that story. That is so powerful. And what an incredible, happy reunion at the end. Thank you for sharing that. And I want
Yeah.
to ask, like, building off the power of story, and I guess also story can be negative if it's spreading misconceptions. And you mentioned one of the things you find when working with businesses, you mentioned earlier, was they think it's going to be really complicated and a lot of steps to start hiring refugees. Are there other misconceptions that you've found that you need to educate about in order to make Amplio Recruiting a successful, a viable business?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have, you know, companies will also often ask us about the barriers to employment, you know, language, language barrier, and transportation, and you know, there's other factors. You know, they're concerned about safety and making sure that people understand what's going on and how to communicate with them. And so we just start from the top and say, look, if they're barriers, that implies that we can never get around them. You know, it's an impenetrable obstacle. So let's call them hurdles, because yes, it's going to take some effort and some forethought and some communication to get beyond that, but we can certainly navigate around or over hurdles, right? And so first off, let's just recognize collectively there are ways around some of the challenges that exist. And then secondly, we've worked with over 300 companies now. We've been able to place thousands of refugees into jobs. And yes, language is always a factor on the front end. But once companies begin to hire individuals and they begin to assimilate into the culture of the company and learn the role that they're in, language is never a factor once they get into the job. And so I totally understand the concern around safety and placing a priority on that. But there's so many ways to use technology and just to leverage this community overall, that to ensure that language is not an issue. And the same with transportation. I've never seen transportation be a barrier to employment. Now, certainly it can cause some challenges, but these individuals want to work. They're highly motivated. They're incredibly dependable. Our retention rates are double what the industry standard is. So transportation, yes, let's identify that as a hurdle, but I've never seen it be an issue to keep people from getting or staying in a job. So we just try to identify some of those hurdles that are there and help companies recognize there are ways around them. And once they kind of make that step and we start to see a few people start at a company, we navigate around some of those initial obstacles, and then it's off to the races at that point. How many more people can we get, is the question that we love to hear.
What I think is so beautiful about the way you answered that question was the interesting thread of language, because you started talking about the importance of the words that we use, even between a common shared English language. So using the word barrier versus hurdle. And I do think the words we use have a lot of power because they tend to anchor our thinking and a conversation, where a barrier can be impenetrable, as you mentioned, but a hurdle, who doesn't feel a sense of satisfaction clearing a hurdle and showing other people how to do the same, right? So that is like a challenge you want to stand up for. And then weighing that with the language with the actual employees that are being hired being different than English, and how that hurdle is overcome as well. I thought it was really beautiful how language wove through your answer in different ways.
Hmm.
Now, I'm curious, and you've touched on a few of these during our conversation already, but I'd like to ask directly, what makes running Amplio Recruiting different than a staffing agency placing native-born workers? And do you offer services on top of job placement?
Yeah, that's a great question as well. I mean, at the end of the day, we are going to look and smell and act just like any other staffing company. It's just that the way in which we approach our work, we're placing a higher precedent on the individuals that are our employees, and those individuals most often are refugees who have come to the U.S. from all over the world, and they have the legal documentation and a strong motivation to step into the workforce. So, of course, there are things we are doing differently because of that. But for a company, especially companies that already are using staffing agencies, there's really not any initial difference in the way in which we go about engaging with them as a company. But there's certainly things that we do internally to engage our community in a different way. So we've got multiple offices across the country, but all of them are located in communities that are extremely diverse and communities that are known as refugee resettlement areas. And so for that reason, we have a really strong word of mouth, really strong walk-in ratio. Excuse me. So on a daily basis, people showing up at our office looking for a job. And we say we're probably the only staffing company in the country that has more people than open positions. And it's always been like that since we started. And even today, when it's maybe a more desperate war for talent than there's ever been, we've still got more people that are looking for jobs than open positions that we're filling. And so we love being in that situation. Excuse me. But it's the constant challenge is to make sure we're matching the right people into the jobs that are open, and that we're always identifying the right clients that we can support in the positions that they have. So that's a pretty big factor that separates us from probably any other staffing company. And the way that we engage these employees, I mean, we knew it was different from the start. And so we said, how can there be sort of an external, label on that shows, yes, staffing overall kind of has this pretty poor reputation, but we're different. And so we looked at different ways we could do that and ended up deciding to become the first, and at least at this moment, as far as I know, still the only staffing company that's a B Corp certified. And I think that's pathetic and abysmal, because it's really hard to be a B Corp company if you are making something and you have to consider all the the materials and resources that you use to go into the manufacturing of a product or some sort of item. But what we do, every staffing company should be a B Corp, right? Like you got to care for your people, and that's how your business grows. And so we said maybe this sets a bar and really helps encourage others in our industry to have this external measurement. As far as I know, it hasn't worked, but we're grateful to have that behind our name as well. And I think that helps set us apart in the ways that we care for our employees.
I love that. And I hope that the work you're doing and becoming a B Corp creates a ripple effect with other staffing agencies, setting a new standard of what is expected from a staffing agency. So thank you for leading the way and being the first B Corp staffing agency that there is, at least at this point. I'm also curious now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Amplio Recruiting operates like many staffing agencies who have workers on your own payroll who then you contract out to companies. Now, do you also help refugees find more permanent employment? Or, said a different way, do many of your workers get hired full time eventually where they're placed?
Yeah, so we're set up as a temp to perm staffing agency. So that means they're on our payroll for a period of time and they're our employees. And then as they fulfill the commitments of the contract that they're working on, then they'll go permanent with the company they're working for. And so we set out from the beginning and said, stability is the number one goal for our community. No one wants to be in a temp job or in multiple temp jobs over and over and over again. Everyone wants to be moving towards a permanent position. And that was one of the first questions we would always get asked by individuals in our community. They had learned enough to know the question they should be asking a guy like me is this a permanent job? And so we would, in the beginning, as we were trying to figure out what that business model is going to look like, we landed on this. And so we could say, yes, as you work for us, you will be moving towards a permanent job. And so part of our 30-point scale, do you intend to hire these individuals permanently? If you don't, then it's going to be really hard for us to work with you unless there's just the training that you're providing or the experience they're going to get for the temporary position that they're in is really going to help them move towards a career. And other than that, like we've got to know that they're going to be hired permanently. So well above 90% of the individuals who have completed a contract with us have been hired permanently. And it's not really because we're doing anything different as much as that's just a commitment we're making on the front end, is that that's the expectation of the companies that we work with. So we love seeing people go permanent. We have a big a logo in our office, and every time someone goes permanent, we celebrate them. They come in and put a nail in the logo, and usually we'll have like an HR manager or a supervisor or something come in with them and celebrate that moment. It's not a huge deal in the grand scheme of things, but for them, it's a huge deal. They've proven that they are in fact dependable, and it's giving them more benefits usually and more opportunity at the company that they've been working for already. And we love that. Our team loves that. Even though we don't benefit technically anymore as a business, those are the most celebrated moments within the company, is when individuals get the opportunity to go permanent.
I love that. And what an incredible rate for 90% ending up permanent. And I love how you phrased, as part of your scale and looking at what companies you partner with, that a criteria is if they're interested in hiring these people on full time. And as you're talking, just also your awareness of what is most important to the employees that you're servicing, the refugees you're servicing, being stability, and really having that front and center as a key criteria to make sure that you're creating a win for everyone involved.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's born out of serving this community day in and day out. So I don't know that it's anything special that we're doing as much as just, we're engaging and listening and trying to respond in a way that we build, the most redemptive opportunities that we can for the communities that we're serving.
I'm kind of smiling and laughing at your response. And the reason why is just the humility of saying you don't think there's anything special with what you're doing. When you're the only certified B Corp and what you're doing is actually completely different and is flipping the staffing agency on its head. And so I do want to call out your humility and actually say that what you're doing is special. And I hope others follow your lead. Um, so moving on to my next question, Amplio Recruiting. When you were first creating it, I'm curious, did you debate between creating a nonprofit versus a for-profit? And if so, can you walk us through your decision process?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is a question that does come up from time to time. And yeah, in the beginning, there was certainly a debate about whether we want to be for profit or nonprofit. I think a lot of people get hung up on this question as they're considering what they want to do, to the point that sometimes it limits them, or it keeps them from actually doing something. And so I would say, that is not a decision that is a final decision, right? Like, make a decision and run with it. And you can always change it down the road, right? So we were at a place where in our community, there were a lot of nonprofits that were really active, and a lot of them that were doing really good work. And some of them even trying to help refugees get jobs. But the way that they approached the company and the way they were perceived by the company when they were approached was vastly different than a for-profit, staffing company. It's expected, if I'm walking in the door, that we're working towards a contract, and that within that contract, you're going to pay me a certain amount for the services that I'm providing you. It's just expected. And so we could be serving the same exact family of people who are looking for jobs, but a nonprofit walks into the same company and says, "Hey, I've got some people who are looking for work." They're just going to be received differently. And so we have great relationships with a lot of the nonprofits that are working in the communities that we serve across the country. And we work together really closely in identifying companies and working towards partnerships with those companies and getting individuals employed. But the way and the respect even that we're given when we walk in the door as a for-profit is vastly different than the way that they're treated. They're hoping that the company will donate or sponsor a table at their banquet that probably amounts to a few $1,000s maybe, whereas the company is literally paying us thousands and thousands of dollars because of the way in which we're set up and the way in which this business works. And so it allowed us pretty early on to say, if we go this route, we think we'll be able to have a greater impact, kind of a greater good mentality on the community. Even though we'll have to earn trust from our community that we're not a nonprofit, but over time we've been able to do that. And so, our mission statement, it's not to get as many refugees jobs as possible. The mission statement is to help great companies hire as many refugees as possible, right? We stand on the side of the company. They're the ones who pay us and allow us to operate this business. I mean, right now, approaching $6.5 million in revenue this year. That's all come from companies who are paying us as a for-profit business. Would we be able to raise $6 million a year if we were as a nonprofit? I don't know. I think it'd be really difficult to do that. So that was the decision for us, but it's different for everybody and whatever thing that you're working on. But don't let it slow you down. Don't let it cripple you or keep you from being able to just make a decision and move forward and do something and try to find where that impact is. I think for-profit and nonprofit seems to be, the lines are so blurred these days. In the end, it's just what kind of, how can you have the greatest impact?
I really appreciate your answer to that question. And specifically about the way you would be perceived from your clients coming in as a business or as a nonprofit. And realizing that as a business, you would actually be perceived more legitimately, since that's the way the staffing industry works. And I'm also a firm believer while I think there's a very important place for nonprofits, I'm a very firm believer in the power of changing the way we do business to be a force for good. Because what makes business so powerful as a force for good is that it's sustainable. If you create a business like yours that is having a positive impact, but is also generating money, and the bigger it grows, the more impact it gets to make, you're not relying on donors to fund you. So you're not at, I guess, the mercy of philanthropists and whether there's money available or not, but you're able to navigate your own future and your own impact.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, even right now, we're helping some of our Afghan refugee employees who have families in Afghanistan to evacuate their families. Well, it's a really expensive process to pay for the chartering of planes or whatever it might be to help these individuals get out and get to a safer place. And we've been able to raise money to do that from people who we have relationships with because we have this for-profit business that we've operated and run and worked with so many different companies. So then if we over a strong relationship, then we come and say, hey, we're trying to raise money to support these individuals. Yeah, let's do that. But it's founded and it's been built over time, in a trusted environment. And so it definitely is a really interesting dynamic that changes things. But I think there's other, there's some really great reasons why certain organizations should be a nonprofit. And at this point, we just encourage the nonprofits that we do work with to really expect the business community to be financially invested in some capacity. If they're providing employment, that's great. But if they don't recognize that the support of those individuals does come with some sort of financial investment, then I'm concerned the way that they're going to be treated in that work environment. And so we highly encourage anybody we're working with to at least put some sort of value up front in the process to really allow for respect to be in place across the board.
I love that. The put your money where your mouth is. Have some skin in the game.
Yeah.
Now shifting topics a little bit, you co-founded Amplio Ventures with your wife Sarah in 2017. Can you tell us a little bit about what that is?
Yeah. So we recognized as the company was growing and we were placing more and more people into jobs that job placement is a really effective tool for leading people to stability. But if we wanted to really move the needle at a much bigger scale, then we also need to think about job creation. And what does that look like? And how do we get to be a part of job creation? Well, really, at the end of the day, that means there's got to be some ability to invest capital in a way that can allow for that to occur. And so so Sarah and I, along with some other partners who knew much more about investment and specifically venture capital than we did at the time, said let's see if we can put some resources in this into capital and into an investment structure that would allow us to invest in companies that want to hire and want to be committed to hiring refugees, as well as refugee entrepreneurs. Are there entrepreneurs out there from the refugee community that we could invest in and really help them grow their business and tell a greater story? Again, coming back to story, like what would it look like even if we could invest in just a few of them and allow them to have a deeper impact in the value and the way that they're perceived by our country. So that was the original vision. And much like the staffing company, made a lot of mistakes and kind of learned through the process. And so at this point, we've made a few excuse me. At this point, we've made a few investments and have several others that we're in process with. And specifically right now, just providing flexible capital to companies that want to hire refugees, and right now thinking a lot about Afghan refugees who are coming into the country and will need jobs. So revenue-based financing, or just some sort of creative way to get behind and provide capital to companies that want to hire refugees, but potentially need some funding to make that happen. It could be to create a training program. It could be to create an apprenticeship program, or just to be able to increase pay rates so that the jobs you have are more attractive to the refugee community. Could be to help with transportation needs. So right now we've got several companies that are using those funds in different ways. And we're excited to be able to tell the stories that come out of this over the next 12 months or so.
I love that. I'm curious. I mean, you've been doing this work for a while. As you reflect back on it, what would you say has been the greatest personal impact for you and your wife going down this journey?
That's a tough one to answer. Um, the greatest personal impact. I mean, I hope we haven't seen that yet. There's been a lot of things to celebrate along the way, but I think our team, I think we all are just in a place where we recognize the potential and that we feel like we're just getting started. I mean, our team is made up of refugees from all over the world, and most of them have been with us 3 or 4 years, and I feel like we're all just kind of hitting our stride, and we love seeing the impact we're having in the cities where we are, but we know there's more cities and there's more people out there that we can have an impact on. So we're just starting to piece this whole thing together, and we want to continue to drive at what we think is a greater impact. So our goal right now, we're aiming to be working in 25 different cities by 2025. And we feel like if we hit that goal, we'll be able to, it means that we'll place around 30,000 refugees into jobs. And so that's kind of the big number that's right in front of us over the next few years. But I think there's a lot more potential we can have. There's a lot more collaboration that we can pursue. And I hope it gets to the point that companies, that this is just a kind of a normal part of their HR and their recruiting, is to recognize there's marginalized communities that have been overlooked, but with some effort, they can engage those communities and see a lot of success for the company.
I love that. Now, how can companies interested in diversifying their workforce get connected to you for staffing solutions?
Yeah, they can reach out to us through our website, and there's a easy form to fill out to describe the initial needs that you have, and then you could just reach out to me directly. My email is chris@ampliorecruiting.com, and happy to engage with companies. And there's more and more initiatives that are being launched to help companies navigate the first few steps in this process. Businessesforrefugees.org is a group that we're a part of and helping lead, and they're facilitating support for companies. There's actually a new initiative that just launched this week from the State Department, U.S. State Department, and the White House, called welcome.us. And it's specifically to help companies hire and engage Afghan refugees. So there's a lot going on in this space, and welcome businesses to step in and be involved in whatever way it looks like: hiring, providing services, being willing to be involved politically, even in lobbying for more opportunities. But the thing is, in our economy right now, we need a lot more. We have a huge shortage of talent, and so the opportunities we get to bring in refugees to our country, 70% of them are in the prime working age, and seeing those individuals step into a job and fill a gap is really the best thing for our economy. So we want to continue that narrative, and see more and more refugees and immigrants have the opportunity to live out their own version of the American dream.
So well said. And I'll put links to all of the references you mentioned in the show notes. Now, as we're running to the end of our time together, is there anything we didn't cover that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I think that I mean we covered a lot. I think I just keep coming back to, for those in the audience who are listening to this, just knowing that there are opportunities out there. There are huge gaps in the ways that we engage refugees in the U.S. and there's a lot of challenges out there. And so, engage with, find a local organization that is involved, and just learn from what they're doing and figure out how maybe you can get involved in, in some places there's not one, and it just means going, finding an ethnic restaurant that you've never eaten at before, just go have a meal and support that business and ask them how you can help them. And I mean, it's just find ways to engage with people who are not like you, and ask some questions, and be the annoying person in the room that's willing to lean into that, and kind of see where it'll take you.
I love that. I'm going to say be the curious person in the room.
That sounds a lot better.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Chris. This was an amazing conversation. And thank you for the great work you're doing and the example you're setting within the staffing agency industry.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for allowing us to share our story, and yeah, I think there's a lot of people like us out there. It's just a matter of recognizing opportunity and jumping in. And so glad to share, and hope it's encouraging for others. And look forward to continuing to hear great conversations on this podcast.
Thank you.